Well, hello there, and welcome to this video. I'm doing something a little different than usual today. I am going to review Wings of Fire, just Arc 1, not the whole thing. And while I am talking about Wings of Fire, I'm also going to show footage of me drawing my favorite character of the bunch. If you've read the series, you probably already know which character I'm drawing, but if you don't, I'll just tell you right now, I'm drawing Glory. She's so cool. I mean, everybody knows it, so. Anyway, this is going to be a pretty spoiler-free review. I'll get specific in some places, but hopefully so specific that if you haven't read the book, you won't know what I'm talking about, so feel free to listen to this even if you haven't read the books. If I do say a spoiler, I will tell you to skip. There's just one thing that I feel like I have to talk about that is a bit of a spoiler, but other than that, you should be all good. The other thing I want to say is I will be doing this video in two segments. My first segment will be general thoughts, and then after that I'll go through each book 1 through 5, that's the books of the first arc, and talk about what I liked or disliked about each of them. That way, if you are super adamant about having absolutely no spoilers at all, just listen to the first section. And with that, I will start talking about the books instead of rambling. Alright, part 1, my general thoughts. I'm going to start this out with a disclaimer. I am in my mid-20s. I am not the target demographic for these books, which according to Amazon is age 9 to 12. So obviously you're listening to the opinion of someone who is maybe not the exact age range that these books are targeted towards. Also, I, as my username states, am a bookworm. I love reading, I read a lot, so I have opinions when it comes to books. And I think I have pretty good taste, but everyone thinks they have good taste, but TLDR, I'm picky. So I'll just preface this review with that. If you feel like I'm being too nitpicky, that's totally probably fair. But if you are also a 20s reader, a little bit older than the target demographic, and also a bookworm, maybe this will be helpful for deciding if you actually want to read these books that are written for 12-year-olds. Alright, with that being said, I love these books. I am in my mid-20s, not even early 20s, and I love them. All books have their own pros and cons, but overall, I have to say, this is a great series. I couldn't put them down, even to draw, and I mean, hopefully by the video you can tell that I also love drawing. It was a fantastic reading experience. They are kind of, a simple read, so they go by really fast. And I couldn't put them down. I just always wanted to know what was going to happen next. I wanted to know if they were going to solve the problem. And yeah, to me, no matter what flaws a book has, if I can't put it down, that's a good book. So yeah, these books are good. Overall points that I loved about this series, the characters. Absolutely, I have to say, the characters are awesome. The writing is funny. It's not distractingly kiddish, If you are kind of an older young adult and you read young adult, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Sometimes the young adultness of a book and the writing can be distracting. These books were not that way. They were like a simple read, a quick read, but it wasn't distractingly like, oh, this is made for a 12-year-old. The other thing that I loved about these books is the world. I mean, obviously, I love dragons. This is a book about dragons, but I swear the existence of dragons is not the only reason why I like the world in these books. I just think the setup is awesome. Learning about the different tribes, the different specifications that each type of dragon has, how they work with the world, the cultures. I mean, who would have thought a silly little dragon book would have such good world building? But I love how different the different dragon societies are. I thought that was fantastic. The different, ideals and ways of life and aptitudes, they play into the story really well. They give the feeling of a society that makes sense and works. There are different dragons that want different things and need different things, and they all have to live sort of in the same place. And yeah, I loved the cultures, I guess. I also loved, the drama. I guess that sort of plays into the world building of the different tribes and stuff. But I guess I can tell you about like what's literally on the back of the first book is that kind of the crux of these stories is that there needs to be a successor to the Sandwing tribe crown, and these three sisters are basically fighting over it. And with that comes a lot of drama. But the main characters of the books are also young dragons. I mean, probably high school or middle school age in human equivalent, I guess. So they come with drama as well, naturally, as they figure out the world. There's also a little hint of romance in these books. Again, these are kind of dragons that are coming of age. And I'm not a romance person, but I really liked it in these books. I don't know, kind of like if you're like talking with your friend, like at a sleepover, and you're like, ooh, who do you like? Do you think they like you? The romance in these books kind of had that feeling for me. I don't know if that's weird, but whatever. What I'm saying is it's not overwhelming. It's not all about the romance. It's just kind of like an interesting aspect of these dragons like coming into their own and growing up, basically. And so clearly there are a lot of things that I like about these books. I will mention that I thought the plot was maybe not exactly how I would have done it. In some places it's pretty predictable, and in other places it seems a bit random. I know that's a silly combination of criticisms, but I feel like I'll kind of explain what I mean a little bit later. I think maybe some of that opinion comes from the fact that I am in my mid-20s, so I might find plot points predictable that the age group that these are written for wouldn't find predictable. I'm not saying that I'm smarter than all 12-year-olds. I'm just saying, like, as an experienced reader and consumer of media, I feel like some of the plot points were a little predictable. But others were great, not random, but good enough of a surprise that I thought it was really cool. Yeah, I guess most of my criticism comes from the fact that maybe I'm, older than the demographic that these books are written for. And then the last kind of criticism I have is that the final two books of Arc 1 seemed just a little bit not as good as the first three. Maybe that was me burning myself out because I literally read these like all night, every night until I finished them. But I'm just putting that out there as my last, point of general criticism. So overall, ending the general thoughts section, I love these books. I have a small amount of criticism for them, but overall they're awesome, and if you've been thinking about reading them, definitely read them. All right, moving on to the part where I just get to gush about each book. All right, book by book section, starting now. All right, book 1, intro to the series. This book is about the dragon named Clay, and I gotta say, the ending of this book literally made me cry. Yes, I'm in my mid-20s, and this book for 12-year-olds made me cry. They're happy tears, but I'm not spoiling anything. I just really loved this one. It's I think my favorite book, just because of Clay, if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. The plot is a lot of like, what could possibly go wrong? But it was still entertaining, and it definitely kept me on the edge of my seat wanting to know what happened next. Oh, and I should probably mention this. These books are more gruesome than I thought they would be. Like, they're more violent. I definitely didn't expect that because I knew the age range of these books was kind of like more middle school age. Obviously, I'm mid 20s. The violence is fine, for someone who is literally an adult. But I think for a 9-year-old, it's a lot. Because on Amazon, it says 9 to 12. And I don't know if I would let a 9-year-old read these books. I'm just going to say there's a gladiator arena in this book. So if you're thinking about letting your 9-year-old read it, maybe read it yourself first. Again, as an adult, I personally enjoyed it since it makes the world more real. It makes the troubles that the main characters are facing more real. But in terms of being child appropriate, that's definitely something to think about. Yeah, other than a plot that seemed a little bit like contrived, ever so slightly. I have like no, not really criticisms for this book. I really loved this one. I bought the next one like right before I finished it, but again, these are such a quick read that I had to also order it on Kindle because I didn't want to wait the 2 days. In my defense, 2-day shipping is more like 3-day shipping to my town because I live in kind of a small town. And I think it was also like a weekend, so that makes it like 4 days. So I just bought the next one on Kindle as well. If you like books and you're a bookworm, you probably have been in my situation before. This book also really brought in kind of another really one of my favorite points about this whole series, and it's demonstrated really well in this book. The side characters are awesome. Peril and her whole situation is just amazing and something that I don't know, like, oh, it's so cool. Sorry if you don't know what I'm talking about, but if you do know what I'm talking about, I think that is super cool. Peril and the Skywing Queen. I mean, the author writes characters that are like a little bit off really, really well. And in the case of some of them, in a way that makes you like feel for them, but then you're like, oh, should I feel for them? Am I supposed to? I'm just gonna say I've felt a lot for Peril, and I really connected to her, even though she's a side character, and even though she's like, a little bit off. So interesting side characters is definitely a pro of these books. All right, before I start to ramble, love book 1, love Clay, moving on to book 2. Book 2 is told from Tsunami's perspective. That's something I didn't expect, that every book would be from a different dragon's perspective. I thought that was really interesting, actually, and I quite enjoyed it. Book 2 is another one of my favorite books from the first arc. Tsunami is a riot. So with that, I gotta say, this author writes female characters super well. Tsunami is definitely not a Mary Sue. This was one of the least predictable books in the series that I found. And for the most part, that's good. A lot of it seemed, it was a surprise, but it wasn't like super random. The only thing I will say is kind of this is not a spoiler because you don't know what I'm talking about, the culprit. I don't know if that was super satisfying. I kind of wish that it would have been someone else. That's kind of what I mean when I say like some of the plot is a little bit random. There was just no lead up to like the end, the like solving of the mystery, it was just a little bit random for me. But again, I will point out that is me being nitpicky. And also, yes, I just hit the table with my elbow because I was gesticulating wildly because, yeah, I'm a bookworm. I get excited about books. Okay, back to the book. I thought the character growth was awesome in this book. First book didn't really include a lot of character growth, but book 2 definitely did. I love the conflict of friends versus family versus, ambition, and kind of what Tsunami wants out of life versus what, her friends need and stuff. So this book also included some of the most funny points. Okay, this is a spoiler. Skip to the number on the screen, or I'll pin a comment with a timestamp. I love how the queen wrote all the books about how she was a good queen. I laughed out loud when I read that. Like, I actually laughed out loud reading the book. That was hilarious. Also, the thing with Tsunami's dad, like, did I scream? Maybe. Alright, spoiler over. This book is kind of a doozy emotionally, with one of the revelations as well, which, kind of brings me back to one of the highlights of these books is how they make you feel about the characters. You can really feel what they're going through, and you care about them. They're flawed but likable characters, and yeah, I really liked this book. Looking back, I liked it a lot. First book's still my favorite, but this is probably second. Okay, book 3 is about none other than Glory, my favorite character and my muse for today's painting. Yes, I'm drawing Glory. I mean, if you've read the books, you knew as soon as I started putting the colors down. I like this book a lot because the main character is very complicated. Again, you kind of cycle through being inside the heads of each of the main characters, and the main character of this book is kind of one of the more enigmatic ones. You don't really get a feel for her until you read this book, which is from her perspective. And I really like that. She's a complicated character. She's a character who definitely doesn't just blurt out what she's thinking. She doesn't act like how she's feeling, which is ironic because she's a Rainwing, and I think being a Rainwing has a lot to do with how she acts and, how she keeps things in, if that makes sense. Again, if you haven't read them, you have no idea what I'm referring to, but if you have read them, I'd like to know if you agree. This book was also quite an emotional roller coaster, and I think I read it too fast because I would have loved more of this character. Maybe I'm just biased and I want more of this character, but I love Glory angst. It hits the spot, Also, the plot of this book really reads like a mystery novel. I had a lot less ability to predict what was happening in this book than any other book, but at the same time it wasn't random or like contrived in my brain. Again, maybe this is just bias because it's Glory's book, but that's my opinion at least. I seriously read this one so fast. Super couldn't put this one down. I couldn't put any of them down, but I really liked the mystery aspects of this one. Again, there are some awesome side characters in this book. Kinkajou is the MVP of my heart right now. This is another book where the different societies of the dragon tribes really shines through. The ending of this book is awesome, probably one of the best endings of the books in this arc, but it's also a cliffhanger, so just a warning. If you buy this book, definitely get the next one at the same time. And maybe the last one, because, from here on out, it's kind of a whirlwind. that leads me into book 4, which is from Starflight's perspective. This book is really cool because kind of everything that's been hinted at really starts to tie together in this book, which I thought was interesting. It's like a pro and a con. Like the threads all come together in this book, and this book really feels like a finale, but it's not the finale, if that makes sense. I kind of like totally forgot about the main crux of the book, like the main prophecy, deciding which Sandwing Queen was going to be, chosen. There were also mysteries in this book too that I didn't like just guess. Although some of it, I think I did guess a little bit early. I think some of the stuff from this book was hinted at a little bit too heavily previously. But again, I'm an adult and these books are written for kids. So that's probably why. This book also featured a lot of character development. I didn't connect with Starflight like super well in the other books. Probably because growing up I was a nervous, nerdy child just like him. But he really grew a lot in this book. And by the end of it, I was so proud of him and I came to really appreciate him. I think sometimes it's a bit difficult to write an intelligent character because, at least me personally, I don't like it when the smart character just seems to pull something out of nowhere. And this book kind of does a good job of like hinting things to Starflight. Starflight can, make the connections kind of like along with the reader and it makes sense. This is foreshadowing a little bit for my thoughts on book 5. Anyway, I also really like the way this book ended. It's just, perfect poetic justice. And again, the ending also contributed to the feeling that this book was the finale, but it wasn't. So with that, I will move on to my thoughts on book 5. Book 5 is the last book in the arc, Sunny's book. I do like Sunny as a character, but unfortunately this book was kind of my least favorite of the 5. Again, this could be due to the fact that I was just reading them so fast, one right after the other, for like a whole week straight, not really getting a ton of sleep. Don't be like me. To me, it just seemed like this book maybe had to tie stuff together too quickly, had to tie too many plot points in too quickly. And so, kind of like I alluded to before, some of the revelation just felt like random. There was kind of foreshadowing, kind of like a mystery leading into kind of the final piece needed to choose the Sandwing Queen, but the actual like final piece sort of seemed to fall into Sunny's lap. Anyway, kind of to gather my thoughts here, the final piece of the puzzle seemed very Deus Ex Machina to me. There wasn't a lot of like solving the problem. It was like this outside character kind of just being like, here you go. And then the main character kind of being like, I know what to do. Again, I'm being picky. This is a kid's series, and it does kind of fit the character a little bit. Sunny is definitely kind of an outside the box thinker, so it would make sense that she would think outside the box at the end and like know what to do. But in terms of kind of the other characters stepping in and just luckily knowing what to do, just seemed a little bit disappointing to me. Also, there's like kind of a little part where the quote unquote villain of the series is like, you spoiled my plan and this is exactly what my plan was, and kind of it over explained it a little bit. It would have been much cooler if it were kind of figured out by the main character of this book, Sunny. But still, this book did have some interesting revelations, especially about Sunny and her family. It had some revelations about the scavengers, and again, the author killed it with the side characters. I really liked Smolder, and there are some parts of the ending that were surprising in a good way, twists in a good way. I think, it's easy to be nitpicky about this book because it's the last book of the arc. Overall, I did clearly like it. I couldn't put it down. I read it through the night, I'm just like, I have a little bit more to nitpick about this one. So I guess that brings me to the final thoughts stage, which means I lied about the video being 2 sections because technically this is a 3rd section. But in any case, if you're thinking about reading these books and you think you're too old, just read them. Even if they're written for, kids, middle school age, young adult, they are still really good. If you like dragons, you'll probably like these books no matter how old you are. And if my opinion doesn't convince you, that's totally fine. But I will say that the author of these books was on the Erin Hunter team, aka she was one of the people who wrote the Warrior Cats series. So if you liked that series as a youngster, you might like these books too. I kind of made the final decision to actually buy these books because I remembered towards the 2nd and 3rd generation of the Warrior Cats books being a little bit too old for them, but reading them anyway and liking them. So I figured these books would be good too because one of the authors wrote these books. Anyway, I figured that might be good to include because if it convinced me, maybe it'll convince someone else that you can read them even if you're older and you'll still like them. Also, there are 15 books in the full series of Wings of Fire. I haven't read all of them. I've read Arc 1 and most of Arc 2. But if you started out in the quote-unquote correct age range when these books first started coming out and now you've gotten a bit older but they're still kind of written for that younger demographic, you should keep reading them. I haven't fully read the rest of the books, but I've read the next 3 and I really like them. So long story short, if you think you're too old for these books, just give them a try. They're $5 on Kindle, so I think it's worth it. The added bonus is that if you're an artist, all the different types of dragons are very inspiring for art. So there you go. Now you have, a whole new fandom to be obsessed with drawing. And these books are really popular. If you like dragons, you've probably seen fan art of this series. And if you read the series, you can interact with the fandom and be like, oh my gosh, I like these books too. But anyway, that brings me to the end of this review / painting video. It was definitely fun for me to talk about these books and draw my favorite character. So I hope that this was at least mildly entertaining or informational or helpful for anybody. If you'd like to see a video explaining how I get my painterly art process to work, I'm planning on making another video about that and probably more Wings of Fire fan art as well. And I'm probably gonna review Arc 2 when I finish it. I just have been really busy and haven't been able to read. But I'm going on some long plane rides, so I can read them. If you would like, feel free to leave a comment discussing our opinions about these books. It's totally okay to disagree with me. And I realize I'm rambling in the outro, so I'm just gonna say thank you for watching, and I will see you around.